Happy 4th of July. Thanks for flipping on the Michael Welch podcast. Today I'm going to give my thoughts on the NBA draft and the first 14 picks, at least the lottery, why the broadcast sucked, and we're all on Kevin Durant watch as we go through the free agency pickups and trades so far. What?
All my blessings, all my blessings, all my blessings, all my blessings. All my blessings, all my blessings, all my blessings, all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up.
So to recap the NBA 2022 draft, broadcast was terrible, the trades were confusing, and the very top of the draft kind of went how we thought, although it was a little bit of a hodgepodge going in. Now we knew the top three prospects were Paolo Banchero, Chet Holmgren, and Jabari Smith from Duke, Gonzaga, and Auburn, respectively. All listed as forwards, although Chet's will be more of a center in the NBA. The other two will be able to play probably the center position if the respective teams go small in the court. Banchero's listed as a 6'10 forward. He averaged just over 17 points per game, 7.8 rebounds, and 3.2 assists at Duke, while shooting 47% from the field and just about 34% from three as well. He was fifth among true freshmen last season in field goal percentage, sixth in true freshmen in rebounding. Chet Holmgren's listed at 7 feet or 7'1", depending on where you look, out of Gonzaga last year. Super skinny guy. Technically, his weight is listed at under 200 pounds. He averaged 14 points, 9.9 rebounds, just under 2 assists, while shooting 60% from the field and almost 40% from three. Jabari Smith had 79 three-pointers as a 6'10 freshman at Auburn. That was good for the most among freshmen in Auburn history. He also ranked top 10 in scoring and rebounding, the only freshman in SEC history to do that in a season. He averaged 16.9 points, 7.4 rebounds, 2 assists, and shot 42% from. Now, before the broadcast began, it was expected that Jabari was going to go first. That was supposedly where the betting odds had slid, was that he was going to go number 1 to Orlando. And just about an hour before the broadcast began, it was Paolo who had supposedly been pulled to even odds. Just before the broadcast, I believe it was Woj that stated Paolo was now at even odds with Jabari, and Orlando still hadn't decided who they were going to pick first, which certainly lent itself to criticism that the number 1 team on the clock didn't know who they were going to pick. But it did end up being Paolo from Duke who went number 1. Chet went number 2 to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Jabari Smith went number 3 to the Houston Rockets. And as Jay Bilas stated, who was on the ESPN broadcast, they got their number 1 pick because there were effectively 3 number 1 picks in the draft. With no consensus number 1, there were 3 top guys. It was fun to see how it all planned out because we weren't sure who was going to go number 1, just that those 3 were probably going to go in some order, with Jaden Ivey out of Purdue being the top guard on the boards and presumably going 4th. Now, real quick, before the broadcast, we also got news that Kyrie Irving, who was going to supposedly opt out of his player option, he put out his list for teams that he would like to be traded to, or if he took the sign and trade, he'd be moved to. Now, at this point, he has accepted his team option, so that's no longer on the board, but he's just been, no surprise, a wild card the past week. But also at that point, Kevin Durant, news had just come out that Kevin Durant was looking at other options out of Brooklyn, as he could be on the move as well, regardless of whether Kyrie actually stays now that he did accept the player option, or whether Brooklyn tries to find some way to move off of him. We'll see if Kyrie or Durant are still in Brooklyn next season. That'll be hot news. So we had a bunch of that news coming out just ahead of the broadcast. The actual broadcast was complete garbage, whether you watched it on ESPN or ABC with a different set of hosts on each. We, of course, had the march out of each prospect that was effectively in the green room or present for the draft, march out ahead of the first pick being called as they came out with their parents, which is typical for both the NBA. And to see some of the suits is always fun, but there wasn't a ton of really flashy outfits this year. However, first pick Paulo with his purple suit and I don't know what kind of pins spaced out all over the jacket might be one of the top fits of the evening. It wasn't a very appealing broadcast throughout. So we got our top 3 picks in, and the broadcasts on either network throughout the evening were just kind of a mess after that. Now we had a number of trades start to go down, and trades started to just pop up on the screen prior to the draft. This pick's going to be moved. This pick's going to be moved. Now that's typical for the second round. I don't know that even half of the assigned draft picks the night of the draft end up being selected by the team that's holding on to them that evening. It's typical for a lot of moves to be made in the second round as teams with no picks are trying to move in, or teams are trying to grab fringe guys and make moves into those positions to grab them. But the first round seemed to have a few moves that really confused everyone. But the broadcast in general, starting with the ESPN group, which was Jay Billis, Kendrick Perkins, and Malika Andrews, reporter and host of NBA Today. I believe it was the first female host of the NBA draft, which is a great accomplishment for her, held down the ESPN side of things. And that was a horrible trio to have together. She wasn't bad. She carried the bulk of the conversations and fun little chit-chat that certainly isn't for folks that actually enjoy the sport. It's for more of casual people tuning in. Jay Billis, of course, provided the really insightful discussion and talks about how players would fit into different teams and scouting reports and that kind of thing. Kendrick Perkins is a terrible on-air personality. He offered ineffective player comparisons, not real great insights, and was just not really an effective communicator. He's just not great on air in general, I don't think. So using him to anchor a 3-person team, being one of 2 analysts besides a host, was not a great idea. And Jay Billis just looked absolutely bored half the time between Michaela and Perkins. So it was just not a great setup there. On the other side of things, ABC had Jalen Rose, Stephen A. Smith, Kevin Nagandi, and Chini Ugwamake, who plays for the LA Sparks. There's no way I said that name correctly, and I practiced it. But that was a complete hodgepodge. Chinny was given nothing to say or nothing really relevant to talk about, and often sat in the corner as a non-contributor. Stephen A. Smith spent a majority of the time complaining about the Knicks and not adding any real meaningful conversation, although I guess he is there as a conversation piece. Jalen Rose occasionally did provide insight, and Kevin did his hosting duties, so it was more of a conversational hangout. It wasn't so much analytical, but it was not particularly enjoyable. There was one point where Stephen A. Smith stated he'd never watched, I believe it was Mark Williams. It was one of the 4 Duke kids drafted, and he wasn't paying any attention. He thought that the Knicks had just drafted this kid, and he stated he couldn't give an analysis on him. He hasn't watched him played. Can someone else in the panel please give a breakdown of this player for him so he can be excited for his Knicks again? It wasn't Mark Williams. It must have been AJ Griffin. And so Jalen Rose gives a breakdown of Griffin for the audience. But I don't understand why Stephen A. Smith spent a period of time stating he's never watched this player play, why he can't give a breakdown of this guy, and why he's even up there. And number one, he's definitely seen Duke play. He's seen Paolo play. Duke sent 5 guys, including Niels, their guard, who went in the top of the second round, to the NBA draft. Stephen A. probably doesn't watch a whole lot of actual college basketball games, but he 100% watched Duke this year. Coach K's final season, sending multiple guys to the NBA draft, including a possible number 1 pick, who did end up going number 1. He watched Duke, so I don't know if he closed his eyes when this starter was on the floor, or what the hell he was even talking about at this part of the broadcast. But it's just complete nonsense, and it's not helpful for the viewer of the broadcast. It was really a horrible job all the way around by ESPN in its presentation. We didn't get a whole lot of highlight reels of players in between picks being made. It was just a lot of this garbage talking or theatrics, not a lot of cuts. Sometimes we did get the player interviews, of course. Sometimes we got the same interviews over and over again, which were kind of pointless, as we all know. But it'd be nice to get more of an actual, what the hell is this person going to do on the basketball court vibe, more than what is this 18-year-old going to say, other than thank everybody every time they come in for one of their 3 interviews as they do their tour around the arena and hit all the spots for ESPN as they interview the pick just after they're drafted. And that, of course, isn't the case as you move later into the draft when the players drafted are not present. Then you're just sitting with tons of dead air time. It's just a poor presentation. Now, as we moved later on into the draft, the number 4 pick was the Sacramento Kings. Now, Jaden Ivey was largely penciled in as the number 4 pick in the draft, the top guard in a weak guard class. Thought to be a nice complementary piece to what Sacramento has going on there, and someone who could play along DeAndre Fox and Davion Mitchell, last year's draft pick. However, he was draft dodging. He did not work out for the Kings. He did not provide the medical records. He did not want to communicate with the Kings at all, and so they drafted Keegan Murray, the big, long, rangy wing guy out of Iowa. I actually like that pick a lot, as long as Sacramento at some point starts to resemble a professional franchise and is able to develop him and doesn't completely hinder his development and what he's able to do. I think he'll be a really exciting player to watch. And the Kings now have, again, a treasure chest of nice pieces. Again, Fox, Mitchell, Sabonis, who they traded for the Pacers halfway through last year. But that trade ended up not really helping either team, so we'll see if they can build around him. Harrison Barnes will be back. They declined DiVincenzo's contract, so he will not return. Rashard Holmes looks like a good center for the group. So they have some pieces there to do something, although the West is, again, challenging, as is the entire NBA right now. But can this team start to put some of these guys together? We shall see. So that meant Mr. Ivey fell happily into the Pistons' lap at the number 5 spot. He actually does have a lot of ties to Detroit. I believe his grandfather was a corner for the Detroit Lions, and there's some other family ties in there as well. But he is happy to be a Detroit Piston at the number 5 slot, and he will complement Cade Cunningham. After that, it was a little bit of a hodgepodge. We weren't quite sure the order of the top 3 guys. Keegan Murray was a sneaker there at number 4. Jaden Ivey at 5 was expected to go in that top group right after that top group of forwards there. Benedict Muthrin went number 6 to the Indiana Pacers, listed as a 6'6 forward. He played 2 years on that Arizona Wildcat teams. Of course, they had a coaching change last year. The assistant from the Gonzaga Bulldogs went and took a coaching job there at Arizona, and they had great success, of course, last season as number 1 seed in the tournament, although they bowed out in the Sweet 16. I think that sounds right. But they had a number of young athletic guys. Benedict was one of them. He'll be a more athletic guard for that Pacers team, who again was in a trade with the Kings to move some higher profile guys around. Not superstar players, big names per se, but talented players. We'll see if those guys can help out those respective franchises. The Blazers made a move with the Pistons earlier last week to acquire Jeremy Grant to slide in next to Damian Lillard, of course, with the number 7 pick. They grabbed Shaedon Sharpe out of Kentucky. Of course, that'll be all the listings everywhere, but he never played a snap for Kentucky per se, never played a game. So he is living off his high school footage, but he has looked so promising that the Blazers grabbed him number 7, and he's pretty much always been mocked as a top 10 player, despite the fact that he did not play last year for Kentucky at all due to injury. The Pelicans, who looked promising going into next year, grabbed Dyson Daniels, who is one of these G League Ignite players. Of course, the G League Ignite is able to offer specific top prospects minimum contracts to come play for their squad in the G League to help them get acclimated for the NBA draft, as opposed to playing a year of college. And all of these top prospects do play for the G League Ignite team. It's not like they're scattered throughout different G League affiliate squads. It's not like one of them's playing for the Maine Red Claws, I believe they're called, or the Grand Rapids Gold Rush, or whatever that team's called now. It's not like they offer 6 or 7 of the top prospects a G League contract and spread them out through different squads. They offer 6 or 7, 5, 6, 7 guys a contract, and all of them play together on this G League Ignite team, which is a mix of these young prospects and a couple veterans as well. So Dyson Daniels, scooped up by the Pelicans. Again, someone you won't have watched on TV probably at all, but another guard for that group, which is one of the few teams that could flip the switch from a borderline playoff team, 8 seed last year, to all of a sudden maybe a championship team. And again, you don't see that very often. There's a difference between being a team capable of winning in the regular season, a team moving from being competitive and winning some games to consistently beating great teams and being competitive in a 7-game series in the playoffs to possibly winning 7-game series in the playoffs against top teams to maybe actually winning a championship, multiple series against the best teams in the playoffs. And the Pelicans are one of the rare teams that can go from that borderline, maybe we'll make the playoffs this year, maybe we won't, all the way up to we can win multiple rounds against top teams and possibly win a championship. Adding another lottery pick here, adding a healthy Zion Williams, infusing him into the roster. And again, there were some reports that there's been some disputes there on whether or not he wants to return. Of course, he was injured all of this past year. But through interviews with the Pelicans GM, Charge and Langdon, he has stated that there was never any issue with the relationship, maybe a little miscommunication here and there, but Zion very much wants to stay in New Orleans and be a part of the growing team. And through some trades they made last year to try and stay competitive despite a rough start, they lost 14 or 15 of their first 20 games, something wild like that. They should, if they remain relatively healthy, be able to all of a sudden flip the switch into a really top-notch squad. Now, the Spurs at number 9, they ended up drafting, I think they had 3 first-rounders, and they were actually kept all of them because the Thunder also had a handful of picks, and I think moved some, as did somebody else here. So the Spurs drafted Jeremy Sohan out of Baylor. I believe he was the 6th man of the year for Baylor, which is actually kind of strange to say when you consider the Bearcats had 2 high-profile guys injured throughout the year. So they kind of shortened their rotation and had to find some new guys to kind of plug that hole. They were still top of the Big 12 this year, a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. They're also dropped out prior to getting to the Final Four or Elite 8. But he still came off the bench. But he has a lot of length. He's a bigger guy. He's listed currently at 6'9", but he has a lot of potential for growth there. And go figure, he is from New England. So another guy with a foreign background heading to the Spurs. At number 10, the Washington Wizards pick up Johnny Davis out of Wisconsin. Much like his former Big Ten brethren ahead of him, Jaden Ivey at Purdue. He had went back to school, got a little bit better, you could say, improved his stock, and ended up being a lottery pick. So he went off to the Washington Wizards, who are trying to figure out what to do with Bradley Beal and the massive contracts they have, compiled with a massive talent that hasn't quite worked out. Now, the New York Knicks, and this is where Stephen A. Smith in one of the broadcasts here decided that he was having a bad day. They drafted Ousmane Dieng, who played for the New Zealand Breakers, a big 6'10 fella, and they ended up moving this guy to Oklahoma City. So Oklahoma City drafted 3 first-rounders, and then this gentleman was actually their 4th because the Knicks shipped him off to the Thunder. So they ended up with 4 first-round guys out of this draft. And I believe they ended up shipping 3 future first-round picks to the New York Knicks in order to acquire him. That seems like a high price. However, the Thunder have been stockpiling draft picks, of course, for years and have more picks than they do roster spots at this point. So really not as big of a asset sink. They have to unload these somehow. So they must have really liked this kid and able to pick him up. The 12th pick was the Thunder's already. They grabbed Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara, small school kid who put up a ton of points and was really a guy that started to rise up draft boards towards the end of the college basketball season. Now, some of the confusion that lasted into the next day was the Hornets picking up Jalen Duren out of Memphis, the next line of top prospects that went to Memphis under Penny Hardaway to get picked up. James Wiseman a couple years back, Imani Bates, who has since transferred out and is actually committed back home in Ypsilanti to Eastern Michigan, a much smaller school. We will see how he does in Eastern Michigan. He has a chance to shine, of course, as a much bigger star on a smaller scale, so that'll be exciting to see. But back to Jalen Duren, 6'11 center, scooped up by the Charlotte Hornets, and it seemed like a great fit there. But he was then shipped off but he ended up going to Detroit in what turned out to be a 3-team trade. So Detroit ended up bringing in Jalen Duren, Kemba Walker, and I believe a second-round pick, as it was mostly second-round picks involved in this 3-team trade. Charlotte did end up getting a first-rounder from New York, although that was I think a first-round pick they grabbed from Denver at some point for next season, 2023. So Charlotte's going to get a plethora of second-round picks for next season and the year following that, and a first-rounder from next year that came via some other team as well. It allows the New York Knicks to get off of Kemba Walker's deal. The Pistons are absorbing contracts right now, and they have already bought out Kemba Walker. He is a free agent on the market, and he'll probably accept a much smaller contract for whatever team he chooses to go to, because he's effectively still getting paid by the Detroit Pistons for probably the next couple of years. But they have the cap space right now to kind of absorb that. But in turn, they were able to get their hands on Duren. Now, what that also does is, my first thought was it took them out of the DeAndre Ayton market, of course, the Phoenix Suns big man, on a restricted offer, I believe. So any offer that is made for him, the Suns can match and bring him back to Phoenix. The Pistons were presumably a big agent in the hunt for him. By the time you listen to this, you'll probably know, as free agency opens up on June 30th. But Duren is going to be in a similar mold as DeAndre Ayton, so I don't think that they will be spending the money on him. Rather, maybe grabbing a few guys here and there, but nothing big, but rather spending that money to kind of absorb some contracts and draft picks, as it sounds like they're doing already. They actually just made another move with the New York Knicks. The Knicks brought in the Knicks flipped center Nerlens Noel and guard Alec Brooks to the Detroit Pistons, which freed them up $19 million in cap space, which is going to the Pistons, as well as, I believe there's a couple draft picks involved, 2 future second-round picks, to the Detroit Pistons. And what that does is free some money up for the Knicks in order to presumably sign Jalen Brunson away from the Dallas Mavericks. That's what they're looking to do right now, to finally bring a point guard into that franchise. So that was the second move that's been made with the New York Knicks. But on draft night, the big one was to take on the hefty contract of Kemba Walker, which they've now bought out in order to get their hands on Jalen Duren. Following that, the Cleveland Cavaliers added Ochai Agbaji out of Kansas to their roster. He'll be a nice forward to slide into their relatively young group. The Hornets drafted Mark Williams, the massive man out of Duke. He's listed at 7'2". I believe his standing reach is 9'9", which is some kind of record. He's just a beast, and they needed a center there in Charlotte. The Hawks grabbed AJ Griffin, his teammate, out of Duke after that. Now, he's had a number of injuries. I believe he missed his 2 years of high school ball previous to being at Duke, so he's really only played one of the past 3 seasons, although he's an excellent shooter to be added to the Hawks roster there. The Rockets added Terry Eason out of LSU, who's done a bit of transferring around before he landed at LSU. And that's the end of the lottery there. Of course, it cuts off at 14. And we had a number of trades towards the bottom of the first round. Both Memphis and Minnesota got involved in a few moves towards the bottom. Some of the top picks that I liked was Patrick Baldwin Jr. being drafted by the Warriors. Of course, he played for Milwaukee this past season. He played for his father. He was a top 5 recruit coming out of high school. It's one of those where you're looking down to see where the top guys have committed, and you basically see, Duke, Arizona, Michigan. Then you see this random Cougar icon, and you're like, who is that? Well, it's Milwaukee. That was Patrick Baldwin Jr. in the mix of all these other top prospects going to big schools. He committed to Milwaukee to play for his father. Now, he had a number of injuries this past season, so you didn't actually see him play much when you turned on your TV. ESPN actually made a point of one big game between him and Detroit Mercy. Antoine Davis Jr. played for Detroit Mercy. He was a bigger prospect for that school, and he'll be in the draft next year. So it was kind of a showcase on like a Thursday night. They put him in a prime time slot, Detroit Mercy and Milwaukee, so you could see Patrick play, and you could see Antoine Davis play each other. And, of course, due to injury, you didn't see Patrick Baldwin play at all. And I think he played, I don't even know if he played double-digit games on the season, unfortunately. If he's able to get healthy and he's able to develop with the Warriors, which it certainly seems like he will, off of the bench, he's 6'10", he can shoot, he can handle. We'll see what he can do in the pro leagues. But it's possible they got another massive steal in the draft. I think that's an excellent grab for the Warriors. And he just kind of plopped down there at pick number 28. Now, Ty Washington, another little Kentucky guard. He was drafted by the Grizzlies at 29 and traded to Houston. He's had kind of a rough time last season. Kentucky, of course, wasn't really known for being a top slot team last year. Ashibwe, their center, returned to school. He was, of course, the only one that showed up for their first round game against St. Peter's, and that's what will really stick out to folks. He just had a tough time last season. Tough time shooting, tough time fitting in, but he's a freshman. But he was a freshman. He measures at 6'4", I believe his wingspan 6'8", and he could really pop for a team. It's amazing Memphis didn't hang on to him, but moved to Houston, young group. He has a chance to be really spectacular there. In the second round, we had 9 international prospects go in 28 total picks. Both the Miami Heat and Milwaukee Bucks had to forfeit their second rounders due to tampering violations. The NBA just snatched those right away. So we actually ended up with 58 picks, not 60 picks in the NBA draft. 10 of those 28 selections were traded to teams other than those that made the picks, which actually seems like a relatively low number compared to what we see some seasons. Some of the top guys, Max Christie was grabbed by the Lakers. He went to Michigan State. Caleb Houston out of Michigan is going to the Magic. Bryce McGowens from Nebraska, who was the lone star on that sinking ship last year, but was really a monster for the Cornhuskers, or the Husker Corns, whichever way you want to say it. He was a true freshman, but he averaged 16.8 points, 5.2 rebounds per game, and played 33-plus minutes for just a garbage squad. 6'6", guard, almost a 6'9" wingspan. He could be a really great player that no one watched in college. Timberwolves drafted him, but he's going to end up in Chicago. E.J. Liddell from Ohio State ended up with the Pelicans. Trevor Neals was the 5th Duke player taken on the night. He goes to the Knicks. Moussa Diabate from Michigan went to the LA Clippers. There was not real strong opinions that he would be drafted. I thought he would be. And finally, the 44th pick in the NBA draft, he was scooped up by the Hawks and traded to the Golden State Warriors, is a sophomore out of Toledo, a sophomore guard by the name of Ryan Rollins. He averaged 19 points, 6 rebounds, 3.5 assists per game to make it on the all-first-team MAC squad. Almost a 6'10" wingspan, measures at 6'3", so a long kid, and just interesting. You don't see as many non-power conference guys go in the draft as you think. It's still a lot of top Power 5 schools. It's still a lot of international guys and Ignite guys. You actually don't see a lot of small school fellas, especially underclassmen who went early. But Ryan Rollins going to the Warriors as well. Time to develop. Young guy. He left school as a sophomore again. Guard. So that'll be interesting to see if he can do anything in the league as well. All right, so NBA free agency is in full swing 1 week after the NBA draft. We are currently just a couple days in. As I'm recording this, Rudy Gobert has just gotten shipped off in a big trade to the Minnesota Timberwolves. If you had to pick your top 10 destinations where he would have landed, that may not have been on your list. Now, of course, there haven't been a whole bunch of major signings at this point, but we've had a number of trades triggered as part of the free agency experience. But let's start with this. Obviously, Kevin Durant is at the top of everyone's watch list after officially stating that he wanted to be traded out of Brooklyn and putting in his trade request. He stated he would like to go to the Phoenix Suns or the Los Angeles Clippers. I think that was the other team, but this has become a very fluid situation because he mostly just wants out. And that was hours after Kyrie Irving decided he was going to pick up his player option with the Nets to remain with the team. However, he has now stated he's going to try and force his way to the Los Angeles Lakers. So what we effectively have at the point of this recording, and again, this could change by the time it's hitting your ear holes, is Kyrie Irving is on a player option deal for next season with the Brooklyn Nets, but doesn't want to be there. And the Nets, quite frankly, don't want him there either. They can't rely on him to show up to work, even though the vaccine, him being an unvaccinated player, should be irrelevant this season. They just can't count on him to show up to practice or to games, as he took a number of excused absences as well last season, and they want him gone. They're having trouble finding suitors to get rid of him because he now has a reputation in the league despite his massive talent, which is something we don't see too often. If you're a talented player, teams will often come and get you. Right now, they seem to be having problems with finding a partner to get rid of him. And Kevin Durant, we're seeing all kinds of potential trading destinations for him, all kinds of sports columns with all kinds of potential landing places for him. Now, let's keep in mind, as Giannis Antetokounmpo and Nikola Jokic and Steph Curry are rolling up MVPs the last few years, Kevin Durant can still make a case as being the best player in the NBA, quietly, as the Nets have only won one playoff series in the past 3 years that he's been there, and him and Kyrie Irving only ended up playing 44 games together should they not hit the court again as Nets, which just seems impossible at this point, which is horrible. Now, they both sat out the first season they were Nets together. They both had injuries going into the season, knowing that they were both going to sit out their first year together as Nets after they decided they were going to team up, which is terribly, terribly unfortunate as sports fans and for how these mega teams are going to be discussed in future analogs and future NFL, NBA history discussions. But he still is one of the best players in the NBA. I can make a case for one of the best shooters in the NBA, one of the best offensive threats, despite all the talks of Giannis, James Harden, Steph Curry. He still has a hat in the ring, his name in the game. And most recently, all we've heard from Kevin Durant prior to this trade request is that the Nets suck, and that was more about the Kyrie Irving situation, and then Harden being traded and his issue, and then him looking well when he went to play for the 76ers, and then Ben Simmons, who the Nets got in return, sitting out the entire season, and what he's going through, and him stating that he had mental issues and mental blocks preventing him from coming back, and whether that was true or not. And so all the talk about the star teammates that he's had, was he fully recovered from injury? They got swept out this season, first round by the Celtics. Of course, the Warriors win another championship, so they don't need Kevin Durant. He was garbage. And just all this talk of negative about everywhere he's been, and all just how his accomplishments don't mean anything, which is just completely absurd. Because now every basketball news cycle is, where's Kevin Durant going to go? And is it going to be a record number of players and picks included in a trade for the, I think, 35-year-old Kevin Durant, who's just a couple years removed from a crippling ACL injury? And teams are going to have to give half the roster and all the picks for the next decade to get him. And everyone's involved in that hunt. So what does that really tell us about Kevin Durant's value right now? So stay tuned for the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Brooklyn Nets saga. It really is terribly unfortunate that back in 2018, just prior to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving deciding to team up and go to Brooklyn, the Nets had started a nice young core, a nice young group there with Caris LeVert and Spencer Dinwiddie and Joe Harris, who's the only one still with the team right now out of this group, and Jarrett Allen and Shabazz Napier was playing minutes for the squad as well. And it was certainly a team that eventually needed a star or a piece to kind of push it to the next level. But when those two guys decided to go there, and Kevin Durant brought old center DeAndre Jordan in tow as well, his buddy, with the same agents, they had to sign him up as well for a 2-year deal at the time. So when those three came to town, it involved trading a number of those guys away and moving pieces around that have since gone to other places, and the team moved to shape around those two guys, and now they'll be gone, and the team, it just looks like they'll be forced to completely reboot the entire franchise again. Not that much different when they traded for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett past their prime, except these guys are in their prime and just been extremely difficult to work with, particularly in Kyrie's case. So particularly difficult for Kevin Durant, whose reputation will continue to take a beating, as he chose a friend to team up with here, and Kyrie just let him down. Basketball is clearly not his top priority, despite his talents. Still getting dragged over the Warriors stuff, of course, and terrible way for his career to go, as still one of the best future Hall of Famers, one of the best guys in the NBA, who just gets tons of flack for what he does. But we are all on Kevin Durant watch, effectively, right now. So let's hit on the trade that just went down. Rudy Gobert to the Timberwolves, and in exchange, the Utah Jazz received Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley, Leonardo Bolmaro, close enough, Walker Kessler, Jared Vanderbilt, so 5 players and 5 picks. 23 first-round pick, 25 first-round pick, a 26 pick swap. So I assume that'll be the best top pick will get swapped, if that's the case. 27 first-rounder and a 29 first-rounder with some protections on it. It may come as some surprise to folks that may not pay as much attention to the NBA. Was a true center worth that kind of a haul? Is that crazy? Wasn't he going to leave Utah anyways with the dysfunction there? And that's probably exactly what Rudy Gobert is worth. That is a massive haul for someone who provides the defensive ability that he does, even able to come out on the perimeter and play some perimeter defense, and to be able to sink back into the paint and be one of the best, if not the best, interior defender that there is in the NBA. And he will be irreplaceable for the Utah Jazz. So this is effectively blowing it up and rebuilding around Donovan Mitchell, whose defense completely disappeared in the playoffs, not necessarily known for being an effective defensive player. And they really suffered defending any kind of perimeter shots or anything like that in the playoffs and in the regular season. They ended up trading away Joe Ingles, and Mike Conley is kind of disintegrated as a player and isn't performing up to what they'd hoped, but he's getting up there in age a little bit. So not bringing back a placeholder for Rudy Gobert, although I'm sure Jared Vanderbilt will slip into place for him. He's been a great young guy for the Timberwolves and probably the most valuable person to come back in this trade. Patrick Beverley, he's still got a reputation, obviously, as a little fire hydrant, as I say, a little irritant as a point guard. Walker Kessler, Leonardo Bolmaro, fine pieces. Malik Beasley is a rotation guard, I think, but mostly this is about the picks, right? Which is essentially punting on the current state as far as competing for a championship. You know, Donovan Mitchell and keeping him, I mean, they chose between the two. That's what they were going to have to do, is choose between Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. The chemistry wasn't there on the personal side of things anymore, and it just wasn't going to be effective to build around both of them together with what the future was looking like on the books. So flipping out Gobert, restarting here. Again, 3 unprotected picks, 23, 25, 27, and you can't trade first-round picks in back-to-back years, but you can do certain protections and certain swaps, that kind of thing. That's why you see this. So then in 26, a pick swap, and in 29, some protections on a pick like that. So that's way out into the future. And the Timberwolves just putting it all on the table. We are going to compete now. The front office is hell-bent on making D'Angelo Russell into a star on both sides of the ball, despite the fact that a lot of NBA insiders and followers don't seem to think that he'll necessarily be the elite point guard that he needs to be in a league full of elite point guards. They, of course, have Anthony Edwards, who's turning into a superstar, a top-flight elite player in the league. They did resign Karl Anthony Towns, I'll run through him when I run through the rest of the contracts in a second. He did get re-signed as well. I assume he'll slide down to effectively the power forward position and play a little bit more on the perimeter so they can play him and Rudy Gobert together. I assume that was in the plans. So I assume those will be the 4 pillars of this team moving forward. A lot of these pieces, again, Jared Vanderbilt being very valuable. Patrick Beverley is a veteran, is still a very important piece as well, even if he's not someone that would eventually end up in the 8-man rotation for a championship-winning team. And just a couple other pieces and moving the picks away. Of course, some fans look at this in bulk at the number of picks that were given away. Analysts do as well. But the thought process, of course, is we're trying to win a championship. You use picks to get top-flight players that you hope win you championships. So if you have to bundle a bunch of picks to put you in a position to get one guy, which will presumably put your team in a position to win championships for years to come, that's why you do something like this. I personally love it for the Timberwolves. As we saw in the playoffs in the first round against the Grizzlies, I think they certainly have the talent offensively when they all are able to hit their ceilings and perform at their very best to kind of position themselves to make a deeper run in the playoffs, but we saw too many turnovers, very sloppy, very frenetic, and just out of control sometimes. Part of that's, not having control on either side of the ball. Sometimes the offense isn't operating properly in the defense. You're caught out of position sometimes, despite the fact that they've made a great improvement on that side. So having an anchor, especially in the middle, like Rudy Gobert, to really hold that down, I just think it just changes everything for what the Timberwolves can do. When I put my list together of top 10 teams to watch in the NBA next season, I expect them to be right near the top, and I'm just so excited to see what they'll be able to do without losing presumably any starting pieces. So I think this is just going to be a phenomenal squad to watch. They'll be excellent defensively, and they have a number of pieces on the offensive end that'll be a number of weapons that can score. So if they can keep those turnovers down. There we go. And kind of control the pace a little bit better and make smarter decisions as a team full of younger guys. I think they'll be in a lot better shape. They were one of the fastest teams in terms of pace per play last season, so we'll see if they slow things down a bit offensively to allow Rudy Gobert to get down the floor and post up. So we'll see if it does change their change of pace per play on the offensive side. But maybe it won't that much. Maybe they'll kind of figure him into some sets and still be able to push the pace and allow him to kind of play some catch up and not worry about him posting up on the offensive side as much, but kind of just relying him more on the defensive end and still pushing the pace on offense. So we'll see. Again, just excited to see what they do with him on the court. From Utah's perspective, this had to be done. Unfortunately, you weren't able to really maximize on the ceiling of the team and push for a championship run. And you weren't able to make the pieces fit and bring the pieces in to raise that ceiling. So you have no other choice but to blow it up. A lot of teams like to run in neutral and just are fine making the playoffs every year, first round, second round. But that clearly wasn't going to work anymore for the staff. Dan Snyder is out. For Donovan Mitchell, he was pissed. For Rudy Gobert, who didn't want to be a part of that anymore. So it was very smart to maximize on, getting rid of one of your guys, whether that was Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert. I actually think I would have dumped Mitchell and looked for another guard to scoop up. I just think that Rudy Gobert's actually the more irreplaceable talent between the two. But nevertheless, what's done is done. So here we go. Man, we'll have to see what the Jazz do. I'm not excited for it. Not super excited for them next season. I think Donovan Mitchell's going to have a rough year here while they recalibrate. Now, one of the first bigger moves made was just prior to the start of free agency. It was the San Antonio Spurs making a move to the Atlanta Hawks. They flipped out Dejounte Murray in exchange for a 23 first rounder from Charlotte, which is protected, a 25th first rounder, a 26 pick swap, a 27 first rounder, and Gallinari to match salaries. So, from the Spurs' perspective, Dejounte Murray, I guess, didn't fit on their timeline anymore. He's still only 25 years old. He was their point guard, primary point guard for a majority of the season, 21 points per game, 8 rebounds, 9 assists, and you go, why in the hell would you trade someone like that? Well, they seem to be still kind of resetting. They've been acquiring young players while still missing the playoffs the past few years. So you would say, well, they were rebuilding. They grabbed 3 first-rounders in the draft and have a bunch of young pieces still. So presumably he still didn't fit on their timeline of continuing to build, and they don't want to pay his contract and give him a new deal when it presumably comes up. I believe it's next offseason. He's got 2 years left of his deal here. And I guess he just didn't fit on their timeline anymore. So they decided to punt on him and effectively stock up on more picks, which doesn't seem like the worst idea. Again, a 25 and a 27 pick with no protections. And 26, they're going to pick swap. And at 23, you do have next season you do have a first rounder as well, but it has some protections. So if you're not able to collect on that due to protections, it rolls over into the next year with later protections. I'm not sure if they're in this particular case. I assume it's like top 10 protected, and the next year it's usually a little lighter, like top 5 protected, and then it usually, if it doesn't convert by like year 3, then you're usually stuck with 2 second rounders in its place or something like that. It's generally how these work. So you hope that you get the earlier, higher pick option out of these kind of things. But they'll get at least 2 unprotected picks out of it, presumably a higher pick in 26 again. Gallinari, I believe, will be bought out if he hasn't been already. So he's not really going to factor into this. And they're just resetting their start time again with these young guys. And I assume that they'll start to probably move what they have left of their pieces. They moved Derek White already last year, of course, to the Boston Celtics, so we saw him play well into the playoffs, although it was quite terrible in the finals. San Antonio currently has 10 guys aged 22 or younger under contract, so that effectively set their development back a couple years. Good choice, bad choice, it kind of depends. Was it a good choice for the Hawks, who now effectively have 2 true point guards that they want to start next to each other in Murray and in Trae Young, of course. One of them will have to play off-ball. Will they be able to do it? Presumably, that'll be Trae Young, who will be able to kind of hunt his shots and move off-ball. We'll see how effective that is. It could really be a problem and blow up in the Hawks' face if that does not work effectively. Now, of course, the best way that was thought for the Hawks to really upgrade would be to package a bunch of the young players together, not picks like in this particular case, to upgrade to another player. And instead of doing that, they brought in another young guy to fit into the rotation and flipped out a bunch of picks. So was that the best way to do that? Good question. Very good question. I'm not sure that was the best way to do that. However, they did move off of Kevin Huerter. He was flipped out to the Sacramento Kings. So he will be off the roster, presumably opening up. Tend not to think of these things in terms of starting positions, but presumably Huerter, which I don't believe he started the entire season, but he was a part-time starter, I think, and that will presumably open up a starting position for Murray in the backcourt for the Hawks. Now, they really gave away Huerter for next to nothing. In return, they were able to receive a 2024 protected first-round pick, along with Justin Holiday, not to be confused with one of his brothers, and Mo Harkness. So the 24 pick is top 14 protected. They can become top 12 protected in 25 or top 10 protected in 26. So it just keeps rolling over if you're not able to make the selection due to the protections. And 2 guys who will presumably be role players, Mo Harkness and Justin Holiday, in exchange for Kevin Huerter there, who they probably most certainly weren't going to extend on another deal. They just weren't going to be able to afford it. So I'm not sure that was top value for him, but that's probably all that was on the table at the moment. So not so sure about these moves for the Hawks. But the Kings sure got a steal in adding another piece, and that was, I think, a great steal for them, all things considered, to move a pick that's basically lottery protected and a couple guys that they weren't probably going to play in all the moves that they're making. Certainly role players for them, for a guy that's going to be maybe not a starter, but certainly a key part of the rotation. So I think that was a great move for the Kings and a necessary offload for the Hawks, but maybe not the ideal value that you would have liked to get for him. The Indiana Pacers were the other team to make a massive move in terms of shipping off Malcolm Brogdon and sending him off to the Boston Celtics. Now, Malcolm Brogdon is a piece that he's still an excellent point guard. It could be a shooting guard too, an off guard. And the Pacers just weren't cutting it last season. They made a trade midseason, obviously, with the Kings, and both teams still bottomed out in their respective conferences. So they were looking to move Malcolm Brogdon away. And he's still a quality player. The Celtics are going to get him in exchange for bubble gum and duct tape. They're flipping Daniel Theis, Aaron Naismith, who was the 2021 first-round pick that they grabbed, but did nothing for them in their rotation in the playoffs, a 2023 first-round pick, and a handful of other guys as well, but no one that was meaningful to the roster in this last playoff run. Basically, they sent the 2023 first-round pick over, and they sent the end of the bench guys to deliver it and said, don't bother coming back home, is basically what happened. And in return, Malcolm Brogdon, another solid shooter and facilitator, coming back to the Boston Celtics, which might be the only piece they need in order to compete for next season. Averaged 19 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists per game, and is just a solid ball handler. He played defense, just a great two-way guy. Again, just kind of stuck in the dead-in-the-water Pacers team, looking to unload some contracts and kind of just get some fresh air in that kind of group there. So let me do a speed round of a few of the other moves that have been made here. I'll stop if they're significant, and some of the websites are a bit slow in grabbing all of them as they've been trickling in here. So we'll do a speed round here. So Dante DiVincenzo, who was a part of the Milwaukee Bucks, of course, before he was shipped off to the Sacramento Kings. Relationships seem to have soured there, so he will not be returning. That shooter will be going to the Golden State Warriors on a 2-year, $9.3 million deal at this time, according to reports from Shams' social media accounts. So that'll be a nice, cheaper shooter to have for the Golden State Warriors. They'll also be bringing back Kevon Looney to a 3-year, $25.5 million deal. That is solid for that young man. I don't know how that bodes for James Wiseman's future, committing that money to Kevon Looney. Of course, everyone thinks you have to really stick with your number one picks because you spent a number one pick on that player. And that's not necessarily true. If Wiseman isn't going to be healthy or isn't going to fit into the rotation or isn't going to slot in, they can move on. They can trade him, and that doesn't mean they have to ask for a first rounder in return for him. If they can punt him out and get a second rounder for him, it is what it is. I'm not saying we're anywhere near that point yet. I'm just saying if they like whatever pieces you like, pursue them, sign them, build the team. Don't worry about what you've already invested in a player unless you're tied financially or contractually and have to figure out how to get, out of that. But Kevon Looney, with what they paid, which wasn't very much, but he's very much the starting center for this squad, as long as they play a center in this particular case. So 3 years, $25.5 million for Kevon Looney, who's been a part of this team since their 2019 title run, where they came up short against the Toronto Raptors. Of course, they were rotating a number of different centers for the past, throughout this championship run, but he's now going to be the longest tenured guy with the team. John Wall now, a 2-year deal, $13.2 million with the Los Angeles Clippers. Of course, he signed the Supermax, I don't know how many seasons ago, back with the Wizards, then was moved to the Rockets. He effectively missed 2+ years due to injuries and getting re-injured, and went back to Kentucky actually and finished his college degree while he was recovering from these injuries. And he played a little bit when he finally came back last season with the Rockets. But he was bought out, and he will now be heading for Los Angeles, playing with the Clippers for a little more than $7 million per year over the next 2 seasons. Nurkic, Joseph Nurkic, signed a 4-year, $70 million deal to return to the Trailblazers. So he will be back teaming up with his buddy Damian Lillard to kind of round out that lineup. That's really a deal for what he's able to provide for that squad. Zach LaVine, 5 years, $215 million maximum contract to return to the Chicago Bulls. There is a player option in year 5. He is signed with Clutch Sports, so no surprise that he squeezed the max out of that contract there. But he is returning to be a cornerstone of that Bulls franchise, which is still rebuilding, and finally saw the playoffs for the first time in his, I think that was the 7th, this will be LaVine's 8th year. So his 7th year, he finally saw the playoffs. And at the time, I think he was the longest tenured player in the league to have never made a playoff appearance, which seems pretty crazy, actually. Ricky Rubio, 3 years, $18 million deal to return to the Cleveland Cavaliers. He was injured last year, missed an extended amount of time, and he's a great guard that can play off of Darius Garland. Of course, it looks like Sexton, since the middle of last season, will be on his way out. He had injuries last year and did not play. But of course, Sexton out of Alabama, Darius Garland out of Vanderbilt were drafted back-to-back seasons. But it looks like the young Darius Garland's going out last. Sexton, he'll be out. Rookie Rubio will be back in town, and those will be your 2 primary ball handlers for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So our old Spaniard will be back in the fold here. Zion Williamson, again, happy to be a Pelican, at least at this point. I don't know if the ink is dried on the paper yet, but 5-year rookie max contract extension, which seems crazy considering he hasn't played that many games yet. $231 million potentially. I believe there are a number of stipulations in that, but that should retain him under Pelicans' control through 27-28. I only say it like that because, of course, we're seeing players like Kevin Durant, who's just signed an extension with the Nets. I forgot to mention that. Ask for their trades, regardless of where they are contractually, effectively forcing their ways out. So his contract will be under the Pelicans' control, but whether he plays or not will be under his control. The Utah Jazz did trade Royce O'Neal earlier in the day as they started to kind of mortgage off parts here. He did get flipped to the Brooklyn Nets for a first-round pick. I'm not sure if there are any stipulations on that. Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota and Devin Booker in Phoenix will receive 4 years, $224 million, the max contracts for both of those young guys, as they'll be staying with their respective teams. Ja Morant, 5 years, $193 million to stay with the Memphis Grizzlies, of course. And that could add $40 million more to his contract value. So it could push upwards of $231 million if he hits certain stipulations as well. That is the top extension for him. The Grizzlies also re-signed Kyle Anderson to 2 years, $18 million. That really seems like a steal for him. In other Grizzlies news, Jaren Jackson Jr. had foot surgery, repaired a stress fracture in his foot on Wednesday, and will be out 4 to 6 months. So they are trying to bring the team back together, but it will take Triple J's a little bit more time before he rejoins the team. The Pistons, who had a great draft, had an interesting free agency, bringing Marvin Bagley III back on a 3-year, $37 million deal. I don't know that we needed him back for $12 million per season. I can't say I'm necessarily excited to see him play for my Pistons. Andre Drummond, still rolling. 2 years, $6.6 million for the Bulls. That's a great interior presence for Chicago, which continues to have in Ball and Caruso in the backcourt. So to bring on Drummond, even if he's coming off the bench, to provide that defense in the interior is quite a little steal there. The Lakers did grab Juwan Toscano Anderson, who played for the Warriors this past season. He will now be a Los Angeles Laker, as they're filling out their team with veteran minimums right now, and kind of a wait to see what in the hell is going to happen with their team, as they maybe end up with Kyrie, maybe not. I assume Russell will have to be moved out as a part of that trade, but we'll see. JaVale McGee, still rolling in the league, 3 years, just over $20 million to head to Dallas as a big interior defensive presence for that team and a floor runner as well. That's solid for that man, and a not too bad a price for a solid rim running big. I like that a lot. The Nuggets throw DeAndre Jordan a 1-year deal. Not sure the terms on that one. Nick Claxton stays in Brooklyn, 2 years, $20 million. Seems like quite a bit, but I like what he's able to provide for Brooklyn there, although their future's obviously completely up in the air, but I like that they were able to bring that young man back for the interior. Gary Harris, 2 years, $26 million to go to Orlando. That seems outrageous. I have no idea why $13 million per season for a guy that's been banged up and now bounced around to a few different teams. And Orlando is, of course, just rolling in young players and picks. And I have no idea why you'd spend $13 million over the next 2 seasons on Gary Harris. That one's baffling to me. Kevin Knox, another former number 1 pick, 2 years, $6 million for the Detroit Pistons, taking a flyer, I guess, like they did with Marvin Bagley, except they paid Bagley a hell of a lot of money. And Knox, who has not had a career at all in the NBA after floundering with the New York Knicks, a top 10 pick, much like Bagley. I believe he was number 9 a few years back. Same draft, 2018 as Bagley, much smaller contract. DeLon Wright, 2 years, $16 million with the Wizards. Okay. That's a thing that happened. And of course, the New York Knicks, which were baffling the entire draft night, moving all kinds of pieces, moving all kinds of picks, and then moving all kinds of players and contracts. Their primary trade partner, of course, being the Detroit Pistons for a couple of moves. They got their man and signed Jalen Brunson away from the Dallas Mavericks for 4 years, $104 million. So $26 million a year, essentially a player option on the final year. Why? He has never made an All-NBA team. He probably never will make an All-NBA team. He's never been an All-Star, probably will never be an All-Star. Wasn't thought of until he had a great season this past year with the Dallas Mavericks and had a few great playoff games. And he probably won't make an impact in the playoffs or championship run or anything like that next season because he won't be there. Because the Knicks won't be in the playoffs next season. So, did they make the right move to offload contracts? Sure they did. Did they make the right move to dump draft picks, essentially? They moved their draft pick to offload Kemba Walker's contract, essentially. Okay. But to essentially invest all that money and draft capital into Jalen Brunson is just beyond baffling. I think he only had meetings scheduled with 3 or 4 teams. Not that he wasn't a top target, a top free agent out on the market, but there weren't a lot of top free agents. How disappointing if you're a New York Knicks fan. I don't know what the ceiling is for this team, but it's not that high. And that's not a great sign when your floor is also low. Low ceiling, low floor. This is just stupid, quite frankly. And good news, Nikola Jokic has agreed to a 5-year, $264 million Supermax contract to stay with the Nuggets. At the moment, the richest deal in NBA history. I know that makes everyone shudder, but he is committed to Denver. So that's a good sign. The Oklahoma City Thunder decided to pay somebody, which is probably not what they want to be doing right now. But Dort, 5 years, $87.5 million. I have no idea why that was his going rate, why they decided to pay him that amount. It just seems wild for a team that brought in, bring in half a dozen guys this year, new pieces, and still has a number of picks coming forth in the next few years to continue to build, that's splurging this amount of money on a player that presumably won't be really part of any future runs of yours into the playoffs, or won't be any part of shaping your future, is baffling. The Toronto Raptors re-signed Chris Boucher, 3 years, $35 million. He was a key piece of what they were trying to do. It is not surprising that they brought him back. The past 2 years, he's turned into a primary contributor at the center position. He's a former G Leaguer that didn't really show a lot of staying power in the few years previous to that. But indeed, he did stick around and he's been a key piece to what they're able to do, especially defensively, even though his numbers don't necessarily show it, right around 9 points and 6 boards a game, something like that, close to 2 blocks, but he's been a key piece of what they're able to do defensively on the interior. So it's a relatively cheap price for what someone of his stature is able to offer at that price point. Bradley Beal declined his player option and then re-signed a full-length contract, 5 years, $251 million. He's someone you definitely have to think doesn't want to stay on a team that can't manage to even make the playoffs, let alone compete for a championship. You have to think he's going to start rumblings of wanting to be traded at some point. And he's been the main topic of trade discussions for the last 2 years. So he's cashed his payday now, and he had the option for a massive player option this year, and then could have been a free agent or could have just declined it and stayed a free agent. But 5 years, $251 million, that's locked up, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point soon he starts to request a trade and probe into other areas to get the hell out of there. Portland also re-signed Anfernee Simons, who's moved into their rotation pretty heavily, especially since CJ McCollum was traded out to the Pelicans in the middle of last season. 4-year, $100 million, so about $25 per year. That's a solid re-signing there. Again, they're just moving pieces to try and keep, not to lessen Simmons' impact, but they're very much trying to keep a line with Dame and keep him happy. The Philadelphia 76ers. Now this starts with James Harden declining his massive, I believe it was a $47 million player option for this season, and re-signing I don't have it in front of me, I believe it was a massive 5-year deal. But because he took less money this season, it allowed the Philadelphia 76ers to grab some players. So he's both staying with the team and declining his massive player option and taking just re-signing a new contract. It allowed them to make a couple moves to bring players into the fold. The first player they were able to bring in was PJ Tucker at 3 years, $33 million. He is definitely what I call a fire hydrant, like 6'6", center sometimes. He probably won't play center unless Joel Embiid is off the court, but he is definitely what I consider a little fire hydrant down there, much like Marcus Smart, just a smaller guy, hard to move around in the post area in general on the court, but certainly in the post area, even for the bigger guys. They also scooped up Daniel House. I don't have his contract in front of me. Considered a 3-and-D wing. 2 years, $8.5 million. Super cheap. He was with the Utah Jazz last season, buried on the bench. He also recently played for the Miami Heat. That's a solid pickup for them. And they also grabbed last season's G League MVP. His name is Trevelyan Queen. He averaged 25 points, 6.6 rebounds, 5 assists, 3.4 steals, and a block a game this season in the G League, while shooting 48% from the floor, 34% from 3 for the Rio Grande Valley Vipers during a run to a title during the postseason. So 3 nice additions for the 76ers there, alongside Maxey, Embiid, and Harden. They might be shopping Tobias Harris, so he might not be a piece of that equation. Thibault might be shopped out as well, but that could be a scary team moving forward as they start to fill in the edges of that roster. Other contracts signed: Victor Oladipo, 1 year, $11 million with the Miami Heat, as he is returning. Again, he's suffered a number of different injuries. He's playing pretty well in the playoffs, including really pestering the ball handlers for the Boston Celtics. So another year back with Miami perhaps will really further his development at this point, which is not stalled out, but he certainly had his bumps in the road here in his career. And I think that he'll be a great asset back in Miami. Although there was rumor that him and Butler were bumping heads, and that's why he actually didn't play in one of the playoff games. So you always have to question that. Mo Bamba, 2 years, $21 million. The Bamba returns to Orlando. I think it shows that they do want him back, despite the fact that he certainly hasn't exploded, the former lottery pick with the Orlando Magic, but he will return to Disneyland for another go-around. Bobby Portis, 4 years, $49 million with the Milwaukee Bucks. he really came on a couple years back now, and that actually seems like a cheap deal for Bobby to return to this team, as he's been a starter in the lineup at times. Brook Lopez missed extended time last year. If not, he's one of the first guys to come off the bench, and he was key in winning their title a couple years back. He's starting to push up there in age a little bit. It took him a few years to really get adjusted and find a foothold in the NBA, but that seems relatively cheap, all things considered. Tyrus Jones, 2 years, $30 million to return to Memphis. I don't know why that was necessary. He wasn't necessarily a key piece for anything that I saw as part of the Memphis Grizzlies, certainly not their run, and I'm not sure that he was a key piece of the regular series, but young guy re-signing there, I'm not sure that was a good investment of that wealth, but if that's what they decide to go with as a backup point guard, hopefully he shows that he's worth the investment and continuing development. And I think those are all the major and minor and mid-level NBA shifts that I have at the moment. I think that's all I got right now. Okay, so again, KD watch, Irving watch. What are the Lakers going to do? Are they going to be involved? Are the Nets going to be involved? Are we going to see any Clippers moves? We might not. Again, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were out chunks of last season, Kawhi all of last season. So maybe they just turn around and essentially run it back after not hitting the court last season to their full ability. Will Milwaukee make any moves? Will the Spurs or the Jazz auction off any more parts? Where is DeAndre Ayton going to go? Presumably not back to Phoenix, especially after Devin Booker was paid out. So still questions lingering here. Will Dallas find another piece to replace Jalen Brunson? Now, of course, they didn't have Tim Hardaway Jr. last season. I think that was overlooked in the discussions throughout the playoffs. So he, of course, should be healthy heading into next season to help facilitate the scoring load off of Luka Doncic. But will they be looking for another piece to bring in to help supplement him? What is going to happen with Miles Bridges? We're still looking for him to sign a contract. Of course, he was caught in a domestic dispute, apparently, the night before free agency, so this past Wednesday, and we don't know what's happening with that or with the contract situation. That's baffling, but we don't have any details. But again, he's going to be a top free agent in this class, and a domestic dispute Wednesday with free agency opening Thursday. That's a holy hell, what happened there kind of situation. But I'll be back with more updates as they come in. Thanks for listening. My cousin Ben, who I co-host the Polymuse podcast with, started a new podcast with a couple of friends of his called the Fantasy Draft Lineup Podcast, the FDLP podcast, where the three of them each month cover a different comic or movie or cartoon cast. Like He-Man was their first month, and they go through and they have a different prompt and create different lineups from the characters involved in that movie, comic, whatever it is, that particular intellectual property. So check out the first couple episodes now. That's the FDLP Fantasy Draft Lineup Podcast, covering He-Man, the background, their cool lineups of heroes and villains. And I think the second group is going to be picking their top Muppets lineups. So check that podcast out as well. And I will talk to you NBA later, cover some college football stuff coming up as well, and some album reviews. So thank you very much.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a